That was a very, thank you for that, Father. I appreciate you listening to that. Time off purgatory for listening to that story. Plenary indulgence. Thank you so much. Father Joe, it's such a privilege to know and work with him over the years in various capacities. And one thing, many things about Father Joe, he is a Christian gentleman in the finest sense, by the way. Just a remarkable person. Up close, knowing him up close and working with him, just as much as working with him in larger settings. Another thing about Father Joe is I met him first in 2012, and he looks exactly the same. Something's not right. Something's not right. That's it. It's a privilege to be here, really is, and to see familiar faces. My wonderful son, whom I love so much over here, Michael, I'm so grateful he's here. To the students that are here who I've had in the past, what a privilege to see your faces and familiar faces and friends and new people that I don't know. It's a blessing to be here with you as well these 3 nights. If you come all 3 nights, you do get a plenary indulgence, so I just wanted to say that. Knowing so many people knowing me when I speak to them, I always feel like, well, you've already heard everything I have to say, so why are you here? And one person I told that to, I said, you come to us, so many things I've done, like, I don't think I say anything else new. And they said, well, they're kind of like the lectionary. You come back every year to Mass and it's the same thing over and over again, but it's nice. So I like that. That's a nice way to think of it. I hope that's the case. So I pray for amnesia for everyone here who's heard stories that you don't remember any of them. And they sound brand new if I do use a story that I've used in the past or made points and so on, which I will, of course. If I made any new points anyway, I would be not a good Christian, because nothing we say is new anyway. It's all old stuff, just brought out again, right? Ever ancient, ever new. This is our beautiful faith. And it's actually, our faith is so simple, even though it's wildly complex and there's so much to it, but it's so simple in the end. And it reminds me of one time I gave a talk in Hartford, Connecticut many years ago at a nursing home at Easter. I was asked to give, by the chaplain there, I give a talk to the residents on the meaning of Easter. So I went in to the room and all of the people kind of gathered into the space. I had never given a talk in a nursing home before, so I had, PowerPoints, I had a whole lecture, I was ready, and then they all came in, and it was great. It was awesome. And so at the end of the talk, I think 5% of them were asleep, which was the best part, and they were all in the front row for some reason. I think the chaplain put them there. So anyway, afterwards, this one woman came up to me, delightful woman. She had a thick New York accent, and she said to me, "That was very, very nice. I didn't understand a word you said." So that's theology in a word. It's very nice. It's like a dog watching TV, fascinated but incomprehending. So if you feel like that at the end of tonight, then that actually probably was theology I was doing. My students would tell you that. But she said, after that, she said that to me, she said, "I could have saved you a lot of words. God is love." And she's right. So I guess tonight that's what I'll do. I'll try to take those 3 magnificent words and try to unpack them some, to give you something fresh. They say that a good teacher is someone who makes the strange familiar and the familiar strange. So I'll try to take the very familiar phrase, God is love, and I hope to make it as strange as possible for you tonight. And I already fit the bill of a strange person, so it shouldn't be as hard as it seems. My daughter Catherine, who's now 23 years old, up at LSU getting her MSW right now. When she was about 3 or 4 years old, and this is a story I've told millions of times, 3 or 4 years old, I came home one day from work. We were living in Tallahassee, Florida at the time. I came home from work, and at that point in my life, I used to get migraine headaches a lot. And those of you who suffer from migraines know how crippling that can be. So I came home, and all I wanted to do was go to my room and turn the lights out and just get in bed and have no one speak to me. So when I pulled up in the car and got out of the car, I saw my daughter, Catherine, was out in the front yard playing. So I tried to really stealthily close my door so she didn't hear me. And I tried to tiptoe by her so she wouldn't see me so I could go straight to my room. But it didn't work, because she caught me. And she came running over to me. And she came running over to me, and she had a stick in her hand. And she came running to me, and she says, "Daddy, Daddy, look, a stick, look at the stick, Daddy, look." She came up to me and goes, "Look at the stick, look at the stick." I'm like, "Very nice, nice stick." So I kept walking, and she goes, "No, stick, look at the stick." The stick, what? Look at the stick. Okay, what? So I come down, she shows me the stick. It's a branch about this thick. And in the cracks of the branch are these tiny little red mites running in and out. And she goes, look. And as we're doing that, we slowly fall down onto the grass together, and we look at the mites running in and out of the cracks. I don't know, we did that for a minute or two. She was completely mesmerized, and then at the time it was over, we finished, I realized my migraine was gone. My daughter rather, performed her first exorcism. She drove my migraine out by calling me to wonder. She turned the familiar strange, and she showed me that this world has dimensions and depth and colors and beauty that I never realized were there were it not for a child to take my hand and lead me there. So this is what we need, isn't it? We need wonder. We need the eyes of a child. And that's what I want to do tonight a little bit, is take the eyes of the child to something that no child should look at, but yet we do. And that's what's behind me up there on the wall. So let me call on another teacher to help me make the strange familiar, and that's one of our saints in our tradition. I like choosing strange saints. I was debating between two saints, whether it be St. Moses the Ethiopian or St. Abbo, the perfumer of Baghdad. They're two saints. Isn't that awesome? I think Abbo has the better name, the cooler name, the perfumer of Baghdad, who's a 8th century martyr. But I will choose St. Moses of Ethiopia, also known as Abba Moses the Black. He lived between 330 AD and 405 AD, and he began his life in Egypt as, he was Ethiopian, he began his life in Egypt as a slave, born into a slave family owned by a family just outside of Alexandria, Egypt. And he was a very tall man, about maybe 6'5" or 6'6", very muscular, very imposing, and a very violent temperament. So much so that his slave owner eventually cast him away after he had been caught stealing and then murdered one of the neighbors of this owner. And after he was cast away from that family, he went out into the deserts of Egypt and he joined a band of brigands, a gang, which there were a lot in the deserts of Egypt. And he eventually became the most feared brigand in all of Lower Egypt, near the Delta. The tradition has lots of stories about what he was like before his conversion. One of the kind of classic stories is that he swam across the Nile with a sword in his teeth, going across so he could kill a shepherd that he wanted to exact revenge on. This is the man, Moses. So the turning point was one time he and his gang members came upon a community of monks, a monastery, and he had never come upon a community of monks before. This is right just south of the delta of the Nile River. And they looked at this community, they thought this will be an easy target, unarmed. And so they went into the monastic community expecting terror and fear, and they found these monks serene, not at all worried about these brigands. And they found these men didn't resist, they didn't panic, they didn't do anything to defend themselves. As a matter of fact, one of the stories that comes out of this event says that Moses went into one of the cells of one of the monks and grabbed his cloak, his outer garment, and walked off with it. And then the monk ran after Moses, completely naked, holding the rest of his clothing, and said, "You forgot this," and handed it to him. And the story is that Moses was so captivated by this strange courage. This is a strange courage. He was so captivated by it that he asked to stay. And he left his gang members behind and began a conversion to Christianity with the monks. And the monks, at first, wouldn't let him into the community itself to become a monk, which he wanted to. They put him to the test for a long time, made him wait for a couple of years before he could demonstrate himself ready to be part of that community in the way that he would be. They corrected him, they would humble him in public, they did all the things he would never have tolerated in life, but now he was different. He had learned obedience, and he had learned to weep over his sins, as the text says. And eventually he was ordained as a priest. It's an extraordinary story. If you want to look him up, there's a lot more to read. Anyway, so we have the story moves ahead. And now he's much, much older now, and he's revered, and he's a priest, and he's referred to now as Abba Moses. Abba is a word that's used, it means father, of reverence for certain monks who are considered exceptionally wise, and people would go to them for wisdom and advice. And so one time there was one of the brothers in the monastery who had done something evidently pretty egregiously wrong, a public sin of some sort. And so part of the community's rule was if you committed a public sin as a monk, you'd be brought before the community for judgment and some kind of punishment. And so the community asked Abba Moses, if he would come to the assembly around this brother, this monk who had been accused. And at first Moses was reluctant to attend, didn't want to attend, but then finally they prevailed on him. And then, so as he was coming, he got a hold of a basket, and he took the basket and he filled the basket with lots of sand, and then he punched some holes in it, and he put the basket over his back, and he began to walk toward them. And he went over and stood in the center of the circle where the brother was, and he stood there, and the sand was continuing to pour out there on the ground. And of course, the monks are used to Abba's doing weird things, so the monks said, "Okay, Abba Moses, so what's up with the basket?" They didn't actually say that, but something like that. They said, "What does this mean?" And he said, "My sins run out behind me, and I don't see them. And you ask me to judge a brother? My sins run out behind me like sand, and I don't even know that they're there. And you ask me to judge a brother?" Where does he get that idea from? Moses. Did he steal that idea from somewhere? Where?
The names.
Yes, the story of the woman caught in adultery, where Jesus writes in the sand. And what does Jesus say to all the people with the stones ready to throw? Yeah, let the one who has no sin be the first one to cast the stone. And then beginning with the oldest, going down, they leave. So he acts out this gospel passage in a fresh way to reset the vision of the brothers. Not to say that it's okay that this brother did whatever he did, but let's keep things real, brothers. All of you deserve condemnation before the brotherhood and before God. Every one of you, myself first. So let's always keep that perspective when we levy judgment on our brother. Always remembering that. That's a mind that has been touched by what we'll talk about briefly tonight and more the next 2 nights. Touched by a thing called mercy. Mercy. We're going to linger on that word. St. John Paul II said that word mercy is the most beautiful word in human language. Pope Francis said, the name of God is mercy. It's his name. So we'll talk about that more. I feel inadequate to the task to speak about such a thing, but I'll steal from the best. So let me shift gears and tell a few personal stories now. So my wife, Patty, we've been married 30 years now, and on the first anniversary of my asking her out, we still celebrate that, the anniversary of my asking her if she would go steady with me. What a corny thing to say. Go steady with me. Anyway, the first anniversary of that would have been March 15th of 1995, the first anniversary of my asking her out. She gave me a card, which I have framed. And the card on the front says, "The best feeling is when you look at him, and he's already looking at you." The best feeling is when you look at him, and he's already looking at you. It's so beautiful. Another story. Back in the early 1990s, I worked at a place in Washington, D.C. as a volunteer for about eight or so, 8.5 months, called the Gift of Peace, which was a homeless shelter and hospice founded by Mother Teresa of Calcutta, St. Teresa, in 1986. And it was a very transformative experience in my life. And I'm going to tell a couple of stories from it over the next couple of nights, but this one I've never told, which is we used to meet in small groups once a week with the residents who were open to this, because the people who were there were people, Mother Teresa designated it for people who had HIV/AIDS in the 80s, who were homeless and were in the last stages of the illness and needed a hospice. So in other words, they likely would have died on the streets. They needed hospice care, and so this was an opportunity for them to come off the streets and come in for hospice care. So these are people that, almost every one of them, I didn't meet a single one that did not have a traumatic background. None of them. Awful experiences of childhood and so on, abuse on the streets and drug use and so on. Anyway, so once a week they would have a small group, and they would have volunteers. They had all kinds of volunteers that participated, social workers, therapists, and so on. And these groups would meet, and we would process kind of these people's past trauma events if they wanted to. It was really sacred, and I was able to go to a number of them. And we would discuss, one time we had a discussion that centered on this. The person who was leading the group said to the people who were there, what gave you hope on the streets? When you were on the streets, what gave you hope? Like, what things kept you going? You know, from killing yourself or whatever else. And they would identify what they were. Some of them it was people. Some of them it was memories from the past they still held on to that were good things. Some it was they're hoping for the break, to finally get a break to get out. Whatever it was. A few had faith on the streets, but most of them didn't express that. But one of them said, this woman who was, I think she was 18 or 19 years old. She was a prostitute on the streets of DC from 13 years old until she entered into this place. So 13, which is jaw-dropping. That was the first time I ever realized that that was normal. Now I know the age range is quite normal in the sex trafficking world. I did not know that. But anyway, she said that sunsets are what gave her hope. Because there was something about the beauty just before the darkness came over everything that said to her, there's something there waiting. Something beautiful is waiting on the horizon of darkness. Isn't that beautiful? What an artist's mind. Anyway, I found that so stunning. I mean, I found all of the people that they said was beautiful and sacred. But so anyway, so maybe a month later, we had the group again, and I didn't usually see the women in the house because I worked on the men's side. But anyway, so we were there, and she was there in this group again, and I told her, I said, you know, I was just not long ago, I was over at X, Y, and Z place, and I saw this sunset, and I immediately thought of you. And she got really emotional. This is really remarkable. she got super emotional and she said, "You thought of me? No one thinks about me. No one." Can you imagine living life thinking that? No one thinks of me. No one cares. What a magnificent, tragic thing. It haunted me the rest of my time there, that phrase. Third story, I have a dear friend in Tallahassee. I work in the Pensacola, Tallahassee Diocese, as Father said now, which is it's just a privilege to be there. And I work with one of the priests there who works with prison ministry in the diocese, and particularly ministers to those on death row. And he opened up a reentry program, a Catholic faith-based reentry program in Tallahassee for men leaving prison to find a place where they could get all the assistance they need in a faith setting, a safe faith setting. It's really remarkable. It's called Joseph House. And he and I have been friends since 2001 when he was in the FSU program, same PhD program as I. Anyway, long story there. So he was sharing with me a story that I wanted to share with you that he told me I could share. And that's that one day in the residence, he was sitting with one of the men who was a resident there who had come out of prison. His name is Darren. And Darren had been in 20 years in prison, and he spent 9 consecutive years in solitary confinement. That's legal, believe it or not. Jaw-dropping. 9 consecutive years. Anyway, so Darren was sitting, they were at breakfast together in the morning, just the two of them at the breakfast table, and Father Dustin was drinking his coffee, and Darren was sitting there eating Cocoa Puffs. And why was he eating Cocoa Puffs? Because when he came into the house, one of the things he told Father Dustin is, when he was talking about his childhood, he says, one of the happiest memories of my childhood is eating Cocoa Puffs. So Father Dustin immediately went out and bought a whole bunch of Cocoa Puffs so he could have Cocoa Puffs. So every morning this guy would eat Cocoa Puffs. So they were sitting there at the table together, and they were quiet. They weren't speaking. Father was sipping his coffee, and Darren was eating the Cocoa Puffs. And Father Dustin was just looking at him. And Darren said, "What are you looking at? What are you thinking about when you look at me? What a failure I am? What a screw-up I am?" And Father Dustin said he was caught off guard by that. And he said, no, if you only knew, as I look at you, I'm so proud of you, of what you're doing with your life, of the way that you're moving forward. I'm proud of you. It was quiet for a moment, and then Darren said, "Cool." Went back to eating. Magnificent. So what if Lent was a time of rediscovering that when you and I finally turn ourselves back to God, that we find out that He's already looking at us. And that when we think about Him, we find that He was already thinking about us long before we thought of Him. As a matter of fact, He thought about us before the sunrise, before our conception, before He spoke light into existence. He dreamt of you and me and thought of the day He would bring you into existence. And isn't it wonderful when there are human beings in the world who give a glimmer of that kind of love in dark spaces? The God who looks at us with a father's compassion when we think, I know what you see when you look at me, God. Screw up, a failure, a sinner. And He says, oh, I see my son, my beloved son. Just what He said to the prodigal son when he came back, that the son wanted to list the laundry list of all the things he'd screwed up, and He cut him off. We'll talk about that more tomorrow night. But this is what Lent is about. Usually we begin the assumption of Lent, which is not bad, of God is calling. And he always calls on time. It's perfect. Lent is a time when we make resolutions, right? I hope you did. We try harder, right? I hope you are. I am. We return to God again. We search for God. That's true. But far more true is that God searches for us. Everything that you do, every good resolution you have, every desire you have to be the better person, all of that is a response to his initiative that he took already. He's given you the very thing that you think you're giving him because he loves you that much. Another story that struck me hard and just happens to be very similar to the one I just told you. This is 2009. This was national news. It's a long time ago. There was a guy named James Bain down in Polk County, Florida. And I'm going to read you an excerpt from the London Times because it actually made international news. I'm going to read you this excerpt from the London Times. It says, James Bain spent 35 years in prison, which is more time in prison than any of the 246 inmates previously exonerated by DNA evidence in the United States. The longest serving before him was James Lee Woodard of Dallas, Texas, who was released last year after spending 27 years in prison for the murder he didn't commit. Mr. Bain made his first ever mobile phone call on Thursday, dialing his elderly mother to tell her he had been freed. Mobile devices didn't exist in 1974 when he entered prison. The year he was sentenced for kidnapping a 9-year-old boy and raping him in prison. That was the charge. You know how people in prison are treated with that charge? That's what he suffered for a long, long time. But also in 1974, sophisticated DNA evidence testing didn't exist, and officials more recently used to determine that he could not have been the rapist. When asked if he was angry about this miscarriage of justice, Bain simply said this: I am not angry. I have God. Period. And then he moved on to interview or something else. No more explanation needed than that. I have God. So what kind of God do you have to get to think like that? 35 years of your life gone. And you're not angry. Capable of forgiving the unforgivable. Capable of seeing God's providential hand in the worst things that life can deal us. So how do you get that God? And once you get him, how do you get to be like James Bain? How does that work? So that's tonight, tomorrow night, Wednesday night. Tonight is, what kind of God is that? Tomorrow night is, how do you get that God? And then the third night is, how do you get like James Bain? So what kind of God do we believe in? Let me start with Ephesians. We're going to stop at 8, by the way. Don't worry. When I say I'm starting, don't worry. Let me throw 2 scripture quotes out to you. First of all, Ephesians chapter 2, verses 4 to 5. But God, who is rich in mercy, out of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. Or Romans chapter 5, verse 8. But God shows his love for us in that even while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. While we were yet sinners. There's something remarkable about this, but we've heard it so many times, we're so familiar with it that it seems like, yeah, I know that. And so let me just revisit that briefly. I hope in a little more striking way. So St. Paul tells us that divine love is rich in mercy. That the God revealed in Jesus Christ is a God who responds to our rejection of his love, not with retribution or vengeance, but an intensification of his love. His love gets more extreme, more beautiful. It's so extraordinary, this love, in the face of rejection, that its immensity and its beauty can only be captured by the starkest and most horrifying image imaginable. And it's behind me. The image of a tortured, beaten, naked, spit-drenched, condemned man who is absolutely innocent, as no other human being has ever been innocent. A man who, even in the midst of the fiercest hatred or the most bored apathy from humanity, speaks to the very end words of compassion and pardon and love and self-gift. A man who in the most excruciating pain thought only of others. I don't know about you, when I've been in pain in my life, nothing like that. It's hard to think about other people. It's all he thought of from the cross. It's an extraordinary thing. We Christians dare to say that that man of unthinkable love, that Jesus of Nazareth, is God made flesh. It's stunning to say that. On the cross, which for the Romans is the symbol of domination, of terror, of fear, of power. This is what the Romans intended with the cross. The cross was invented by the Persians and perfected by the Romans. The most excruciating and humiliating way of dying imaginable. This is what God chooses to die on. Jesus is God with us, and in him we see perfectly who God is, what God is like, and what he asks of us on the cross. And we see that he asks nothing of us that he himself is not first willing to go through himself in the most extreme way. Jesus, in the most loveless space in all of creation, the cross, shows us that love grows only stronger and more beautiful in the face of rejection. And this love, the scriptures call mercy. Mercy. In Greek, the New Testament written in Greek, the word is eleos. It's where we get in Mass, we say Kyrie eleison. Eleison is the verb form of eleos. In Hebrew, chesed, or raham. Those words all can be rendered variously as mercy. So what is mercy? What's mercy? Well, first of all, the word mercy, eleos in Greek, is a beautiful image in its root, in its etymology. The word mercy, eleos, comes from a word that means oil. It means oil. It means not like motor oil, but like neosporin oil. It's the oil that's used on wounds, to heal wounds. So the story of the Good Samaritan, right? The Good Samaritan comes across this man who's been stripped naked and beaten and bloodied by robbers, and he stops and comes over to him, stoops down, and he puts on his wounds two things: wine and oil. wine to sterilize, and oil to coat for healing. And of course, these are the symbols of baptism and Eucharist, the two sacraments that Jesus gives us to heal the wounds of sin and death in us. And so mercy is this oil that God gives us. Mercy is what love becomes in the face of evil. It's what love becomes in the face of violence and rejection and hatred and apathy. Mercy is love encountering evil and overcoming it. Mercy is love encountering evil and overcoming it. Mercy is not avoiding evil or excusing evil or denying evil. It's overcoming evil. And mercy isn't indulgent or weak in that sense. Mercy is love in the crucible. Mercy is crucified strength. Mercy is strong, not weak. But it's a unique kind of strength. We have a former surgeon here, retired surgeon here, Dr. Bobby, somewhere here. I just met him beforehand. He was a surgeon. The strength of God in mercy is like the strength of a surgeon. Dr. Bobby has immense strength, but he uses it with tremendous tenderness and care and precision when he does surgery. You better hope so. He knows exactly what needs to be touched and what doesn't need to be touched in order to heal. He cuts you to heal you. That's the strength of mercy. It's fierce. It's severe. It doesn't leave us diseased, but it's gentle and it's tender all at once. Mercy throughout the Gospels. Let me tell you a story from another saint I have a dear, great love for, St. Maria Goretti. Many of you may know St. Maria Goretti. Magnificent saint. You probably already know her story, so just let me tell it again. Maria Goretti, of course, died at the age of 11. Beautiful, young, devout, very pure-hearted woman, young lady. She was attacked by her neighbor, who was a teenage boy, who was trying to seduce her. She refused his seductions, and so he sexually assaulted her, or attempted to, unsuccessfully. But in the process of attempting to assault her, he stabbed her 14 times in the chest and in the abdomen. And Maria was brought to the hospital. This is on July the 5th, 1902. She was brought to the hospital immediately, and they began to do surgery on her, and for reasons evidently that had to do with their fear of her having cardiac arrest, they did surgery on her with no anesthesia. 11 years old. And the eyewitnesses who were present for this said that even though she was in agony, she continued to say over and over again aloud that she was offering all her pain out for this man, Alessandro, who had assaulted her. Offering, and she repeated again and again that she forgave him. For the love of Jesus, she would say, I forgive him because I want him with me in paradise. Extraordinary. She lived for just under 24 hours. She died at 3 p.m. the next day, July 6th, 1902. Alessandro was sentenced to 30 years in prison. And for the first number of years in prison, he was hard and unrepentant. And then one night, he had a dream that was so vivid for him, it was real. It was a vision, and the vision was of Maria coming to him, dressed in a luminescent white dress, and she had 14 white lilies for each stab wound, and she handed them to him one by one. And as she handed them to him one by one, each one, he said, turned into a white flame. And as they turned into white flames, his heart began to break, to melt. And he began to experience for the first time in his life contrition, sorrow, repentance, remorse, regret for what he had done. In the morning, the first thing he did was he asked the guard to send him a priest so he could go to confession immediately. Her intercessory prayer in her dying, now in the next life in the communion of saints, was bearing fruit in this man's life. And it did what mercy does, because mercy is love encountering evil and overcoming it, forgiving it. Extraordinary. So he began to become an exemplary prisoner, was in prison for 27 years, was released 3 years early, and as soon as he was released, he went straight to her mother and begged her forgiveness. And the mother gave him her forgiveness. Another work of grace from Maria's martyrdom. He lived the next years reconciled, a faithful life. He would refer to Maria years down the road after he left prison as my little saint. What a thing to say. He later became a lay brother with the Capuchin Franciscans and died at the age of 87. As a brother, he attended Maria's canonization with her mother. You imagine that? And some in Italy had presented his cause for canonization. Imagine that. Only in the world of that are these things imaginable. That kind of mercy. One of the most profound and astounding claims in all of Scripture, which I began with tonight, is 1 John chapter 4, verse 8. Those 3 words that I mentioned. The full verse goes like this: He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. In this, the love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent his only Son into the world, so that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we have loved God, but that he has loved us, and has sent his Son to be the expiation for our sins. Expiation for our sins is a marvelously understated way of referring to the crucifixion and death of Jesus for our salvation. And the fact that on the cross itself, as Jesus was dying, his posture toward us, his attitude toward us was love, was mercy, was forgiveness. Jesus, when he said the words, "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do," he did it while the crime was in progress, speaking to the people enacting the crime around him, but of course speaking of all of the human race. St. Ignatius of Loyola famously said that all of God's activities can be summed up this way: everything he does is God laboring to love us into life. Let me end with one more story. This is one of my favorite stories from my time. Well, it is my favorite story to tell from the Gift of Peace time I was in Washington, D.C. And maybe some of you have heard this story before. So when I was there, I began in early September, and it was early January, and word was that Mother Teresa was coming to the United States, and she was going to do a tour of a number of her convents, and one of the convents she went to visit was this one in D.C. So how exciting was that? That I would get to meet Mother Teresa. I mean, what an incredible thought. So I was extremely excited. All the people, the residents were excited, the volunteers like myself, others were excited. It was an electric weekend. And Mother Teresa was coming to town this particular weekend, and it was her custom when she came to town to not say exactly when she was arriving, because she didn't want the press there. She hated the press. She didn't like doing interviews, in other words. So she would try to avoid the attention so she could just be with the sisters and the people and not get into the press thing. I remember, by the way, as an incidental thing, there was a documentary about Mother Teresa that I watched by BBC, and in there, one of the scenes was Mother being interviewed by a reporter, a British reporter, and the British reporter said, "Mother Teresa, people say that you're a saint, Is that true? Do you see why she didn't want to be interviewed? Come on. They say you're a saint. Is that true? And Mother said, I am called to be a saint. You are called to be a saint. How are you doing? I'm trying. Isn't that marvelous? Equal opportunity. Anyway, so she came that weekend, so she didn't announce it. We didn't know when she was going to come. It was sometime between Friday evening and Sunday. So Friday evening came, Saturday came, no Mother Teresa. Remember, throughout the day, we're all on edge all the time. Is she going to come? Is she going to come? Every time I see a woman in blue and white stripes, I go, oh, it's just you. Just one of the sisters. So anyway, Saturday went by, and then Sunday morning we had Mass. In the morning we had Mass at 6:30 a.m. and we thought, oh, she'll be at Mass. Of course, Mother Teresa's going to go to Mass. She'll be at Mass. So we were all expecting her to be at Mass, but she wasn't at Mass. Well, I'm sure she went to Mass, but she didn't come to that Mass. So backstory, brief backstory. So when I was there, working there at the time I was, each of us were assigned a particular number of residents to kind of be the caretakers for. We were with them all the time, or worked with them and helped them with various things. And I had 3 people, and this one man I had named Richard was one of the 3. I had another volunteer named Peter and I, together, Peter Condre and I. We took care of Richard together because Richard was very weak. He was in the very last stages of the illness. He was very thin, emaciated, he had open sores. So he needed lots of care, etc. And Richard was a very strong-willed man. He had a very, like all of them, very bad, painful, traumatic upbringing past, time in the streets. He was a male prostitute, and anyway, just a lot of mess in his life and a lot of hurt. But his time here at the Gift of Peace had really transformed him. You watched him over the time he was there. He lived about 8.5 months before he died. And it was amazing watching him grow. Anyway, so we got to take care of him. God is calling again. We got to take care of him for that time. So this day, he was so excited. He said, Saturday, he said, when I get to meet Mother Teresa, when I meet her, like, all my life will make sense. Like, all the stuff that happened in my life that doesn't make any sense will make sense. Because this place, coming here, is what saved me from killing myself. So when I meet her, she's the one that's behind it. Then everything will make sense. So he was like, this is like the biggest event of his life. So the morning the Mass went on, and then it ended, and then we finished the Mass, and Richard was devastated because Richard had concluded that Mother was not coming. And he's like, I'm not going to live long enough to see her again. And he was very upset. So anyway, so we got up at the end, and Richard, who really was very weak and could really barely walk, insisted on walking. He wouldn't let us do wheelchairs, so the sisters who kind of supervised us said, let him walk. If he wants to walk, let him walk. So walking was like this. It was like that. So you can imagine, from the chapel to his room was here to that back statue. That's a good 45 minutes. But it's okay, so we did it. It was a thing, we talked and things like that. We were used to it. So we're leaving the thing, but he's very upset and he's weepy and so we're like, she's coming. I'm sure she's coming. They said she's coming, she's coming. Oh, I know she's not. Anyway, so we're walking down the hallway, and as we're walking down the hallway, Richard, for the very first time ever, has a seizure. And I've never experienced anyone who had a seizure before. It's my first one in my entire life that I've ever seen. And he has a seizure, and his seizure makes him jerk, and then he falls backwards, and we lose because I wasn't holding him hard, and Peter wasn't either. He falls back, and he falls down, and he lands on the ground backwards on this granite floor with no bracing. Awful, horrible. And it's one of those things where, when something like that happens, it's like an out-of-body experience, like you're watching TV, like this is not really happening. It was kind of a dissociative moment for me. Like, just, I don't know what to do. So he's there on the ground, and Peter and I are standing there now looking at him. And he's shaking. And I don't know, maybe it lasted 20 seconds. I don't know how long we were doing that before. We weren't doing it. We were standing there. And then all of a sudden I see down the hallway, I see this commotion, I see this blue and white thing. And I look, and the blue and white thing is Mother Teresa. And Mother Teresa sees this. That's what she sees me doing. And I'm like, I've been here for months and I've never done that before. Like, why can't she see me hugging or feeding or clipping toenails? Why can't she see me doing something awesome? This is what my self-centered self is thinking as I'm seeing her, not Richard. Like, Mother's, what is this? She comes running down the hall to us, and she immediately ignores everyone, and she goes straight down to him, Richard, on the ground. She goes down on the ground. Like that. Down on the ground. With Richard, whispering to him. Right over him. She's down over him, kind of like a covering. And at this point, all kinds of people are gathering around, the commotion. The sisters have called the ambulance. And Mother's down there for I don't know how long, and she's speaking to him words, and then his body stops shaking. And then she looks up to Peter and me, who are still standing there, and she says, "Brothers, this is how you love Jesus. Down here, not up there. Get down here and pick him up." What a thing to hear from Mother Teresa, to your bruised ego. And I'm still thinking about that, not about Richard. So we start to stoop down, and then Sister Menorah, who's the head of the house, is like, "No, just go away, we got this. We got this." The ambulance came, they got him on the stretcher, they took him, we all cleaned up all the stuff with the blood, there's blood on the ground, etc. We cleaned everything up. And Mother Teresa, at that time, as soon as that happened, went to the room where she was going to give a talk to all the volunteers and people there. And because we were cleaning up afterwards, we missed her talk. So I didn't get to hear her talk. So you can see my priorities. Like, this is more important. But that's all I'm thinking about. Anyway, so we missed the talk. And while she was there, by the way, I found out from the volunteers that she defined a saint in the most beautiful way I've ever heard a saint defined. She said, "A saint is one in whose presence it's easy to believe in God. In your presence, it's easy to believe in God." Isn't that incredible? Transparent. So, anyway, I'll tell you the rest of the story at the end and bring it to the conclusion, but I want to read to you what I wrote in my journal, which I've kept for decades, thank God. I kept my journal that night, and I'll read you the excerpt here. I said, "What Pete and I got today was more than any speech, more than words. We saw the Word made flesh, Word made action, Word made love, Word made mercy. We got to see all of salvation history played out in front of us. Mother was a fiery image of God, the hound of heaven, sweeping down from on high through the ages in hot pursuit of guilty humanity, stooping down low where we were on the ground, bloodied, fallen, suffering, helpless. And he took us in his arms and looked at us in the eye and rocked us until peace came over us, saying, 'I'm with you always. I'm here. Do not be afraid.' This is the language God speaks to us in his Word made flesh, Jesus Christ. On the cross, God stoops to the lowest possible place to be with those who live in the gutters of the world, you and me. So Richard, after he came back from the hospital, had a long recovery. He didn't have any memory of any of that. I guess during a seizure, his memory was erased, which was sad, but it really wasn't sad, because Richard got to do something that's really wonderful. Richard got to ask all of us who were eyewitnesses to tell him the story. Isn't it marvelous to have eyewitnesses tell you the story of being loved without you even knowing you were being loved? Sounds like something that happens all the time here at Mass. So we would tell them, each of us, and everyone would have their own, their own version, their own details, their own funny parts, their own very difficult parts. And periodically he'd say, tell me the story again. Tell me the story again. So we tell him again, with pleasure. And then I left, and he died after I had finished my time there and left. And Peter was still there. He stayed on for a few more months after I left. And Peter told me that when Richard finally was dying, and Peter got to be with him along with one of the other sisters, one of the last things Richard said to him was, tell me the story again. And so Peter, being this really beautiful, he's an artist to the core. Peter is a remarkable man. Peter said to him, yeah, I'm going to tell it this time, but I'm going to tell it to you different, because I'm going to tell you the story like it's about to happen to you, because it is. Because there was this time when you fell down on the ground and you had nothing left and you had lost all hope and you couldn't control yourself anymore. You couldn't do anything for yourself at all. And while you were on the ground, Mother ran, as soon as she caught sight of you, ran down the ages and came down and scooped you and told you, don't be afraid, I'm here. And so when you get to the other side, you know what's going to happen. As soon as you enter into that next world, you're going to look down the hall and you're going to see him running. And he's going to run, just like the prodigal son story. He's going to run, and he's going to run. And when he gets to you, he's going to throw his arms around you, and he's going to say, I am with you. Rise with me. This is our God.